That, and in just 2 days, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg will stand up in the House of Representatives here at Parliament House to hand down his third federal budget. Over the last month, the Treasurer and his staff have been locked away here in Canberra in the Treasury building, preparing the economic pathway out of the pandemic. And Josh Frydenberg's been away from his wife, Amy, and 2 children. But for the first time, Sky News has spent some rare time with the Frydenberg family at his home in Melbourne. In this exclusive pre-budget behind the scenes, we hear from the Treasurer about his ambitions for the nation and what his family has to say about his political future.
It's good, he's nearly there.
Oh, right near the end. You've nearly done it. One rule.
At home in Melbourne, it's rare for Josh Frydenberg to get time like this with his wife Amy and 2 young children, Blake and Gemma, especially so close to budget day. Coronavirus has cost Australia lives and livelihoods, so recalibrating the balance book is a continuing challenge for the Treasurer. For Josh Frydenberg, that challenge is clarified by a balance of work and family.
Last year, when you were in the midst of the crisis and we didn't know how bad it was going to be, did you think about the kids much and Amy?
Every day, they're the lens through which I look at life, and I knew that they were doing it pretty tough through lockdown, just like every family indeed in Victoria was, and so many other families around the country as our Defence Force personnel or our health professionals were working day and night to keep us all safe. But they got through it, and Amy, my wife, has been a rock star.
Hey, Blake.
Okay, can I come into the car in a second?
Yeah, and can we find
Yeah, sure.
He's a good boy.
It's a timely reminder of what counts.
Since opting for the Treasury portfolio in the aftermath of the 2018 Liberal leadership spill, Josh Frydenberg has faced 3 very contrasting situations for his first 3 budgets.
Congratulations.
The first, back in black.
Well, g'day, I'm here with the Treasurer, and he's delivering his first budget, and it's going to be a cracker. We are back in the blacks. How are you feeling, Josh?
It's going to deliver the first surplus in more than a decade.
I think that budget was confidence boosting and it confirmed the government, the Morrison government, as a safe pair of hands.
A premature celebration cancelled by the coronavirus. The once-in-a-century pandemic producing the largest deficit since World War II.
This is a heavy burden, but a necessary one to responsibly deal with the greatest challenge of our time.
1.3 million Australians stood down temporarily or out of work permanently, their plight portrayed by long lines outside Centrelink. The historic economic blow required historic economic support.
Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and this new $1,500 a fortnight job keeper payment will provide job security at a time when it's needed most.
The economic and personal cost of the COVID crisis was felt in Josh Frydenberg's home city of Melbourne more than anywhere else in the country.
We're angry.
I think what Daniel Andrews has done is wrong.
It's going to affect my livelihood.
Lockdown's not the answer.
He and his family among 6 million impacted by the state's deadly second wave and lengthy lockdowns.
I am so happy to join with all those in this place in celebrating the fact that the numbers have come down, but don't pretend there hasn't been a price. And the price has been immense. And the cost couldn't have been higher for more than 6 million Victorians, Mr. Speaker.
You gave that speech very critical of Daniel Andrews, and you copped a bit of flack for it from some quarters.
Yeah.
Others loved it. That seemed a really personal account to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That motion that was brought into the Parliament surprised the Prime Minister and I. It's pretty unusual to try to suspend standing orders at the start of question time as opposed to during question time. And I sensed that they were trying to make a bit of politics out of what is a very difficult situation, and I didn't hold back in putting the case forward as to why I felt the way I did about recent events in Victoria. And my thoughts were with all those people who were doing it tough. And I spoke absolutely from the heart there and don't regret one word I said.
There's little doubt his family were also front of mind, stuck in Melbourne while he spent months in Canberra.
Last year would have been a tough year when it was through the eye of the storm. How did you manage that? Because he was away so often running the economy, trying to keep things afloat.
Look, I guess I'm used to Josh being away a lot and working long hours. So even when he's in Melbourne at home, he's often out before the kids wake up and gets home after they get to bed. So it wasn't hugely different to us in that respect. Obviously the pressures were really high and there was a lot of stress as well, and we had the same stresses as every family, particularly in Victoria.
During that time away, the Treasurer's task was to keep the nation's economy afloat.
There was a huge hole that was created in the economy last year. We had Treasury fearing that unemployment could reach as high as 15%. That's more than 2 million unemployed, that GDP could fall by more than 20%. These are unprecedented numbers in Australia's recent economic history. And so that's why those extraordinary times called for extraordinary measures. And JobKeeper, the JobSeeker coronavirus supplement, the cash flow boost, the $750 payments to millions of pensioners, carers and others on income support were so important.
The RBA credited those decisions with saving 700,000 jobs. But that benefit does come with a burden for future generations. The Treasurer turning to his former boss and mentor, John Howard, at the 11th hour early last year.
I spoke to him on the eve of announcing the JobKeeper payment with the Prime Minister, and I was explaining to him it's an economy-wide wage subsidy of $1,500 a fortnight, not something that a traditional Liberal Treasurer would be announcing. And he said to me, he said, Josh, during times of national crises, there are no ideological constraints. And for me, that was very much a green light, that we were on the right path and that what we were doing was so important.
Given the opportunity of providing a buffer, the government didn't cheese pair about it. They provided, I can remember talking to him at the time and said it's better to err on the side of over-provision than under-provision at a time like this. And certainly that was done.
On Tuesday night, Josh Frydenberg will outline Australia's next steps on the post-pandemic road to recovery. His third budget, so different from the first two. Since his October economic update, the economy's been bolstered by restriction relief and the resumption of domestic travel. But there's no doubt that COVID challenges and some of the costs remain.
How would you characterise this budget ahead of you delivering it on Tuesday?
Well, Kieran, this is another pandemic budget, but there is a road to recovery, and Australia is seeing some very positive signs with the economy, but we're not out of this crisis yet. You only have to see terrible events around the world, including in India, as well as here. We've had state-wide lockdowns, for example, recently in Western Australia, to remind us that the virus is still with us. It's very stubborn, it's still deadly, and we have to be very vigilant.
Do you recognise, in terms of the vaccine rollout, just how central that is to the economic story right now? Because obviously we see the health component being underpinning the strong economic recovery. If the vaccine rollout doesn't go smoothly from here, that threatens the budget and economic outlook, doesn't it?
Well, Australia's success in terms of our economic recovery does largely depend on our ability to suppress the virus domestically. And that's why we've taken a very strong approach with respect to international borders and, of course, setting up the National Cabinet to work through issues like the logistics of the vaccine rollout.
You will get there on the vaccine front?
Of course we will, and we will continue to roll out the vaccine as quickly as possible. But at the same time, it's really important that state responses are proportionate to the risks that are faced, so that we can keep that momentum, that confidence in the recovery. Bearing in mind too, Kieran, that there's $240 billion on household and business balance sheets today that was not there this time last year. That's money that's either been saved or that the government has provided with its significant support. We want that money to be spent, obviously in accordance with how businesses and households choose, but that money being spent across the economy will help keep that momentum going.
Do you think, like Gladys Berejiklian has suggested that Australians have to have a rethink about how we see COVID-19 once the rollout is done, because at the moment we're so committed to zero cases, but once everyone's vaccinated, or the vast bulk of the population, if we're ever going to reopen the border, surely there has to be a discussion about how we see COVID-19 and the fact that there might be a few cases here and there if people are allowed to visit this country.
I have no doubt that the national, the international response to COVID will evolve as the vaccine is rolled out. And you're already starting to see that around the world. But at the same time, we've seen how damaging a spread of cases can be, even here in Australia, with the lockdowns that we saw in Victoria, that my family, like so many others, were subject to. And so we've got to be very careful to put Australians' health first.
But you think once we get to that vaccine point that there will be a reassessment?
I do think that there will be a rethink across the world as to how to live and deal with the virus as that vaccine is rolled out.
This pandemic budget is also in part a pre-election budget. May 21st next year, the latest possible date for the poll. And with the looming showdown in mind comes a policy and rhetoric rethink. Long gone is the Liberals' push for cuts and constraints. The blueprint now is to repair the budget bottom line through a boost to spending and by reducing the jobless rate.
The last time Australia had a sustained period of unemployment below 5% was between 2006 and 2008, just prior to the GFC. Before that, you need to go all the way back to the 1970s.
History clearly weighs heavy on Josh Frydenberg's mind. Written on the walls within Canberra's Treasury building, where he and his team have relocated for the past month to bring the budget together, are the words of Australia's first Treasurer, George Turner. The Treasury was the smallest of the 7 Commonwealth departments. 5 men appointed in July. 5 men was the whole of Treasury, and George Turner delivered the budget October 1901.
Well, some things change and some things stay the same. One thing that hasn't changed is that any surpluses the states want to get. I can see that. But I tell you, one thing that has changed for this year's budget is that revenue is greater than expenditure.
The states wanting the proceeds hasn't changed too much, has it?
Well, many a Prime Minister have said never get between a Premier and a bucket of money. And I certainly count my fingers after I speak to the state treasurers, because they've always got their hand out.
From George Turner, the first Treasurer, to Josh Frydenberg, there've been only a handful that have faced the sort of global shock of a pandemic. Coming up, a shock of a different kind, the cultural problems plaguing Parliament.
I was raped inside Parliament House by a colleague.
The government is stepping up its focus on women's security. So what else can we expect to see in the budget?
Securing the COVID-19 economic recovery for Australia.
We'll have new Budget 2021 revelations right after the break.